and you're struggling to do exactly the same thing, but it does things differently.
The other thing to say is PowerShell Remote, or PowerShell Direct, I should say. So when you're using Hyper-V, you can actually create a PowerShell Direct session from the host OS to interact with guest VMs without a network connection between them.
It is a really, really powerful, good way to sort of handle that sort of stuff. Yeah, agreed.
For me, like my hydrations lab script is all PowerShell Remote.
Yeah.
Sorry. And I'm going in and doing all of those commands. I'm building domain controllers. I'm building everything on the fly with that PowerShell Direct, and I never log into the actual box.
For sure. And it's also worth pointing out that Windows Admin Center is all built on WinRM and PowerShell Direct.
Exactly. We stepped right into it. There you go. Mark.
Did I? I'm not even looking at the slide deck. I'm looking at your beautiful face.
Right up yet. I kind of knew where you were going, so I thought I'll get ready for you.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah. Okay, so with the things we've got listed here, we're getting back to that question around what's the purpose of what you're doing. Now, initially, your purpose should be to get a lab up and running to test the things out. So let's say you're here primarily for Intune, endpoint manager kind of stuff. That's your number one priority. Get VMs built, test stuff out, deploy apps, deploy policies. But it always helps in the long run to have at least some idea of what some of the other tools are, because you don't want to be, there as the, let's say you're the endpoint manager person in your organization, and you're talking to other people in the Windows team, and they're going, oh yeah, so we've got Windows Admin Center, and then they start talking about Defender for Cloud, and you go, don't you mean Defender for Cloud apps? And they're looking at you going, what on earth is wrong with you? I said Defender for Cloud. Why on earth do you think I mean Defender for Cloud apps? Because neither of you know that they're actually two different products with a name that is 90% the same. So there, it doesn't hurt to see, and basically what you're doing here is, if you don't like the idea about learning about on-prem technologies, so who would prefer not to learn anything more about anything on-prem? Yeah. I'll assume everyone in chat put their hand up. I just can't.
They did. They're just on mute, so you can't hear the hand shooting up.
Now, let's change that a little bit. Are you interested in learning about how to manage on-prem stuff, or view or monitor, etc. in the cloud? So are you still interested in the hybrid story? I'll put my hand up and go, oh yeah, that is stuff that I'm curious about, because it's almost an here's a path to eventual offloading of some of those on-prem workloads. Yeah. So this is where you can start just dabbling in some of this stuff, whether it's just using Admin Center, taking a look at Defender for Cloud, aka, let's go through. Its last name was Azure Defender. Its name before that was Azure Security Center Standard. So yeah,
Microsoft 365 for cloud management defense.
Yes, for Notepad. Yeah. So the reason why I specifically called out Defender for Cloud is that if you're basically installing the log analytics / monitoring agent, that will also go through and install Defender for Endpoint for you on your Windows boxes, actually, and on Linux as well. So that way you can get coverage, you get your Defender for Endpoint, and just to give you an idea of the costing with that. If this is a lab environment where things aren't running constantly, this may cost you like cents per day kind of thing, because it's all up, it's going to be roughly $20 US per month if you leave that VM or that physical machine running the entire time. But if you're only running it a few hours a day, a few days a week, like you're talking about something that, even if it's a paid subscription as opposed to internal usage rights or whatever you're getting through your organization, it can still be pretty cheap, and it gets you that Defender for Endpoint license as well. But then I think we've covered things like, we've covered Azure Update Management previously. I don't think we've really done anything on Azure Arc yet. So that's something that we probably can cover. Like these kinds of tools, we probably should do more of a session on these again. Well, in the future. So
that's where the Azure user group can handle that. Being Arc isn't fine OS focused.
Yeah. but it works with fine.
Of course it does.
Even though it doesn't actually say it's supported, of course it works.
Well, and that was an interesting thing. So Windows Admin Center is actually supported on Client OS. So you can install that on your client devices and remote connect into them and do stuff.
Yeah. There's a couple of down. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. There's a couple of downsides to installing Windows Admin Center on non-server operating system environments. But if all you need to do is access some infrastructure to do some work, and everything is running server core, then simply installing Windows Admin Center on a Windows 11 box or an iOS box is fine. It gets you connected in, and then it's going to run the PowerShell commands for you because, as I said, it's all just a nice front end for PowerShell commands. If that's not a pitch for PowerShell being the way to manage server infrastructure, I don't know what is.
So this is the last slide. So I think, so just sort of quickly here, I think Steve's already spoken a little bit about like you use, so just sort of to give some background, like hydration and kit variations have existed in Microsoft for several decades now. But it just allows you to quickly either like also, so there might be product groups or any of you who've ever had to deploy a proof of concept based on Microsoft architecture, where Microsoft says run these scripts and it will go out and build everything for you on-prem or in Azure, for example. Generally, it's going to be hydration kit, unless someone decided they'd reinvent the wheel because they wanted to spend money with a new vendor.
Yeah,
those things ever happen.
Never said.
So any of you who downloaded that, like the Office 365 or Windows deployment kit, for example, that was all pre-built during. So that's basically hydration, but someone has already pre-configured it and is just shipping you the pre-configured VMs as opposed to the deployment scripts. But depending on like how you're running it, how you're building it, it will go out, find the ISOs you need, download them, do the installs. So you can start with nothing, and as long as you've got enough bandwidth, you can get some stuff up and running really, really quickly. Probably some of the longest stuff in there for it to do is like, the good old, if you need to build out an AD forest, it's that initial desync promo, creating a forest, etc. That's probably one of the longest running elements in there.
Yep.
Everything else is pretty standard.
The desync promo takes about 20 to 25 minutes after building the domain controller and everything associated.
Yeah.
From my experience. So obviously, yes, there are the ones that you can get from Microsoft for labbing, demos, and things like that. But then there's also a whole heap of community-driven solutions. So especially in the config manager space, there's things like Johan's MDT hydration kit, which works. Adam and I and Ben have all created and modified and morphed a variation that we created of PowerShell solution. It's all built to coordinate and manage at the hypervisor layer. So it's dependent upon Hyper-V, and it goes and builds everything for you. Like to the point where you just need to provide the media and you run the PowerShell script as admin, and it goes and sets up the network switches and everything for you. So it all comes down to, do you want to learn how to install it, or do you want to even learn how to configure it?
Yeah.
Two different scenarios.
Do you really want to know exactly what config manager's pre-install requirements are?
And chase them down.
Or would you like to use config manager?
Yeah. For me, I will spin up a brand new config manager environment every time I need to do a demo with the customer, so long as I've got time, and it'll be up and running in 2 hours. Guaranteed, every single time, I'll just spin it up unless I'm out of storage, and I'll be able to sit there and just go, all right, this is how it's going to work, and I can go and name it to their environment if I wanted to go to that level of pedanticness. Otherwise, I can sit there and just go, look, I just want to demo this scenario, and I'll bring it up and show that. And at the end of it, toast it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where, depending on what you're wanting to do in your lab and in your environment, you may go, well, I don't need to have everything steady state. So I can go and trash it every time I've done what I need to do. But in that scenario, then you want to be able to provision it quickly. It's like what you see in Azure. You want the ability to spin up everything of an ARM template. That's me. I go down the rabbit hole and I want to make sure my life's easy.
So I'm just pasting a provisioning script that I use to build my current lab using a framework called Automated Lab that is very similar to the one that Steve, I, and Adam sort of cobbled together. This is very much more polished because people spent real human hours on it other than just like spare cycles. But functionally, if we look at this, this is 64 lines that will build a lab that is a DC and a CA with multiple virtual switches and all that sort of stuff, all in human readable language. And it just does the thing. If you want to build more virtual machines, it's a couple of extra lines. The idea behind this is that as long as you've got that module installed, you can point it at this and it's going to build you what you need. So the point that I specifically used this was A, I'd never used it before and I wanted to see how difficult it was to use. But B, I just didn't want to have to rethink about, do I have all the installation media in that very specific location that I know that I need it in, but I can never remember the location. This just does it for me. So if no one's played with Automated Lab before, I'd strongly recommend giving it a go. I put a link somewhere in the chat. I can grab it again. Yeah, but yeah, it absolutely fantastic for. It's 3 a.m. and I shouldn't be working on this. Just do the thing, and I press go, and it built it for me, and it was fantastic.
The other thing that we haven't really touched on, that I highly recommend if you're going to build a lab that's portable. So if you're doing a laptop lab, or if it's something that could potentially be plugged into networks that are not your own, or you want data network segmentation, put in a router, a virtual router. So we use RS. Yes, it's more than just remote VPN and things like that. You can actually use it as a router, one line of code, and a network adapter, and you've got another segment on that RS server that is completely segmented from your production environment. Why that's important is, especially back in the day when you're wanting to do pixie tests and things like that. I don't know the number of environments that I've seen a rogue pixie server suddenly appear, and all of a sudden people can't build computers. So I just wanted to build up a lab, and it's like, yeah, unplug your laptop. This is why you can't do that. So this is where RS gives you that ability to sit there and say, this is lab A, it is going to be just for lab A. This is lab B, it's just going to be for lab B. And then if you need them to interact, you can go and play around with the configuration with route tables on your RS server. But for most cases, you want them isolated because you're testing a scenario here or a scenario there. And it's the same with DHCP and all of that good stuff. Because then you don't have bleed, you don't have, it's important.
Yeah.
Unless you want to go down to network level, like hardware level networking, and do network segmentation like I have been for the last 6 weeks with the demo that I'm working on, Wi-Fi authentication. And that's a lot of fun, but
I bet it is.
A lot of work. Yes, it is. It's probably the hardest I've worked on a presentation for a very long time.
So what I might do now is I'll just sort of stop the recording just so we can sort of switch over to just any final things that people want to sort of comment on or ask about, in an informal manner without fear of it being recorded. So